Also, she alerted peace researchers to the implicit acceptance in their work of the cult of power. Perhaps most importantly, Bernice, I have Carol in here, Bernice Carroll offered an alternative conception of power that would radically redirect study in a way to link the pen to protest. In her seminal article, Professor Carroll pointed out that virtually all theories of international relations began with a conception of power. And the power variable had seeped into public consciousness of world affairs as well. In its contemporary usage, power referred to control, dominance, and the ability to shape the consciousness and behavior of others, whether they be individuals, groups, and/or nations. The dean of international relations studies in those days was a professor named Hans Morgenthau, who wrote the classic international relations textbook, one called Politics Among Nations, which went through 11 editions from its initial imprint in 1949 until the 1970s. Morgenthau said that power was central to human affairs. Power is the control of the minds and actions of others, and international politics, like all politics, involves the struggle for power. Bernice pointed out that theorists sometimes define power as the ability to dominate. Sometimes they define power as the instrumentalities of control, such as military capabilities. Sometimes they define power as a perceived status ordering of nations. But what was central here in all of these interconnected definitions was control and domination. And so long as the ability to control and dominate were unequally distributed, only those with the greatest power were worthy of attention. Bernice reminded us that there used to be definitions of power in public discourse that emphasized liberation rather than control. These older definitions included words like strength and competence and rigor and energy and empowerment, and I add the ability to actualize, we used to call self-actualize. To quote Bernice, thus it appears that the currently predominant understanding of power as control and dominance is a development of recent decades. The more traditional meaning centered on the idea of ability and strength. She went on to warn radical peace researchers also that while they clearly had a better grasp of reality, they too had reified power in the modern usage. She suggested that peace researchers failed to, quote, challenge the prevailing conception of power as dominance, its preoccupation with institution groups or persons which are perceived as powerful, and to some extent also radical peace researchers had the tendency to identify with those institutions, groups, or persons who they saw as powerful. The danger, she implied, is that we, the most progressive of scholars and activists, may be inadvertently embracing the conceptual tools that reinforce the status quo rather than take sides for social change. To illustrate her point in a way relevant to both peace theory and I would add feminist theory, Bernice Carroll offered a vivid quote, I think it was selected because of its vividness, from the works of one of our most honored international relations icons of the time, Karl Deutsch. But the quote makes the point. Today, Deutsch wrote, and for one or more decades to come, the nation states are and will be the world's major centers of power. They will remain such centers as long as the nation states remains man's foremost practical instrument for getting things done. I don't know if you could find a better quote than that. What implications for peace and feminist theory did Professor Carroll suggest that could be deduced from this idea of the cult of power? First, scholar activists needed to reject the notion that power represents dominance. Second, scholar activists needed to broaden their research lens from focusing on so-called powerful institutions like the nation state or decision-making elites and begin to examine the entirety of the social, political, and cultural terrain. Third, scholar activists needed to utilize the older conception of power as actualization, as competence, as assertion of rights. In other words, a vision of power that understands that historical change is a complicated affair involving masses of people not ordinarily studied or valued by contemporary scholarship. Fourth, scholar activists needed to reject a frame on reality, accepted even by the more radical, that presents history as the struggle between the powerful and victims, and which portrays people as impotent to assert their rights and prerogatives. I put a parenthesis here, my own addition to this. Discourse in the academy is particularly good at framing political reality such that people are powerless or ignorant or lacking in resources to assert themselves, or are in the end the cause of their own victimhood. This projection is particularly strong among those who never set foot off the college campus as they pontificate about the behavior of people. That's my own addition, I'm sure Bernice would agree. Summing this up, Professor Carroll writes, one of the most pernicious effects of the cultist conceptions of power is that it has built up a strong association between the lack of power in the sense of dominance and powerlessness in the sense of helplessness. To break out of this mold, what seems most urgently needed is to restore to public consciousness and to the consciousness of scholars the idea of power as competence. To develop that idea more fully by differentiating the kinds of energy, ability, and strength which it may imply, and in particular to seek to study powers of the allegedly powerless. And she does some of that in the article, and I don't have time to refer to. Where are we today? The last section of my presentation. It seems to me that Professor Carroll's argument is as critical to us as peace researchers, feminists, worker rights activists, anti-racist activists, and indeed all social justice activists today. While the academic world is perhaps more complicated today, and there are manifestations of perhaps greater theoretical diversity than existed in 1972, I would argue that the main lines of the cult of power argument still holds. Power is reified in our academic disciplines. Top-down models of human experience still predominate in the social sciences and the humanities. For most fields, non-elites remain voiceless and invisible. At best, they are presented as victims, not actors on the world stage. Academic paradigms, whether consciously conceived or not, therefore, project a profound pessimism about social change and human possibility. And for some scholars, the victims become the cause of their own victimhood. The most well-meaning of us as scholars and concerned citizens present a view of the world that demeans and discourages the vast majority of humankind.